Okay, I was going to the Washington school. I was 6 years old, evidently, because I was in the first grade. And I don't remember the teacher's name. I know she lived at the Victor Hotel. I know she lived there, the teacher lived there. But there was really no playground. If you look where that school was, there's a bunch of trailers parked there now. There was never much playground stuff there, area for kids. We were kind of there on the street. And this airplane started flying around, you know, and everybody's looking because it's pretty low. You know, up here you don't see an airplane that low. And so and even the teachers and everybody came out and was looking, you know, what's that guy doing? Why is he flying so low around here? And they were all getting, you know, you could hear them talking and whispering and talking about it. And even as a kid, you're wondering what they're doing. You know, that's airplane not very high and all this. And all of a sudden, he went over the Catholic Church, which is just north of, just across the street from that school. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going to hit the roof. And I go to the Catholic Church. And I thought, you know, why? I hope he doesn't hit the church, you know. And I know everybody else later was thinking the same thing. But I remember seeing that thing going over there. And the teacher was standing there on the street. She was probably about to have a heart attack. And it went on over. Well, it was all over with, you know, excitement and everything. I never thought any more about it till found out that evening that the plane had come up in this area up here someplace, I think, and crashed, and the pilot was killed. It was her boyfriend, that teacher's boyfriend. One day we were walking up 2nd Street, and there's a big building there, 2-story with brick, you know, wall, and on the side of it, it says something about a mortuary. And I know there was a mortuary in Victor, but it was up on 3rd Street. And I thought, oh, was there a mortuary over there, or why? Yeah, she said that was a mortuary there, and I looked it up, and there was a mortuary in that building there. And she said, I used to work at the mortuary. And I said, you worked at the mortuary? I couldn't imagine anybody wanting to work at the mortuary, but you know, you do a lot of things, like I say, whether you want to or not. So then, I don't know how we got off on it. I've racked my brain, and I can't remember how we got off on it. But she was telling me that she had a friend by the name of Fleetwood, Mrs. Fleetwood, and she used to come to the house and see my mother, or my grandmother, and then my grandmother would visit with her, but I was never to Mrs. Fleetwood's house. I never knew where that was. And so she was telling me that she was visiting with Mrs. Fleetwood one night, and this lady in Victor had passed away, and she told me her name, and it wasn't anybody I knew, so I didn't remember anything about it. But before she died, she evidently had been to the mortuary and made arrangements or made things set up or whatever. Anyway, she emphasized on them that she was to be buried with her rings. She had some kind of wedding rings or something. I don't know what they were like or how much they would be or whatever. But she wanted to make sure that they were left on her when she passed away. And my grandmother helped get the body ready, you know, for services. So she knew this, you know, and I think, God, why does somebody, you know, all this stuff. But anyway, the woman passed away, and they had her funeral, and evidently Granny wasn't there working. I don't think she was working there anymore then. And she knew about the woman's funeral that day, and she was at Mrs. Fleetwood's house that night, and they'd had the funeral, and they were visiting, and she said, looked out, and she said, all of a sudden they realized that there was two cars, I think, going on the road out to the cemetery. And they were wondering, why is somebody going to the cemetery at 7 or, it's dark, 8 or 9 o'clock at night probably, I don't know, but I know it was dark. And she said, they wondered why they went out there, and they stopped. And they calculated by looking at this, knowing where this woman was buried and where these people were, that they were in the area of her grave. And I think they suspected that she was taken up and her jewelry was taken. You know, that's what they decided, that's the only thing they could be doing, you know. So for umpteen years, I have been trying to figure out where Mrs. Fleetwood lived, that they saw this, because my grandmother's house faces that way. The cemetery's over here. I knew it couldn't be my grandmother's house, and I didn't know where Mrs. Fleetwood lived because I never was there with her. One night I'm talking to Shirley a few months ago, and I'm telling her this, and she said, well, I can tell you where she lived. I said, where? She said, in the house where Sandy's living. I said, oh my God. Her daughter lives, and she said that, and she said, that's right. From that house you can see the road to the cemetery.
So it was Mrs. Fleetwood's house they were in.
So now I know. I'm sure the lady was relieved of her jewelry. But she didn't, it wasn't anybody I knew, and I'm only 7 or 8 years old, or maybe 10 years old, and didn't mean anything, her name didn't mean anything to me, you know, right, when she told me about it. But I'm sure she was relieved of her jewelry. Must have been, from what Granny said, it was beautiful rings that she had,
yeah,
and probably worth a lot of money, you know. But I don't think she has them in her grave anymore, or didn't have them very long. Well, when I worked at the drugstore, I had some tourists come in one day, and Victor's the neatest little town, you know, they'd been to Cripple Creek, and somebody told them to go to Victor to see Victor. Oh, this is really a neat little place, you know, but she said, we saw the strangest thing coming over here. I said, well, what was that? And she said, we saw a naked man walking around. And I said, you did what? And I said, well, how did you get to Victor? I said, did you come on the paved highway from Cripple Creek? No, she said, we were on a dirt road. Well, it finally dawned on me, there's a couple of dirt roads that you can come over the hill here and come down through Goldfield here and go to Victor. And I always call that one road the Rangeview Road, because you can see the range from it, you know. And 2 people lived up there. Blanche Lecoq lived over here in a house. She was a former prostitute. There's been a lot of stories about her. And over here in this cabin was a man by the name of Bob Montgomery. Well, he had a friend, and I wished I had found that man's name, but I never did know it. He used to come in the drugstore all the time. He informed this man would check on him, make sure if he needed groceries or if he was all right or this stuff. So I told him one day, he said, you need to tell the people in Victor not to get excited if they see me out there walking around in the nude, because I like to sunbathe in the nude. So everybody in Victor never got excited about seeing Bob out in the nude, but the tourists did. And I know there are several stories about Blanche Lecoq now too out. And my grandmother knew her. And I think having run the restaurant thing, she knew some of those girls that were in that business. Because one day I saw her at the post office, and we just lived across the street from the Victor post office. And I went home and I told my grandmother, I said, that lady with the face is over there at the post office. And so she said, oh, I want to see her. So she took off for the post office, and we went over there, and she talked to Blanche, and they visited for a while. She knew Granny. And so then after we went home, she told me about her face, that the wife came and threw the acid in her face because she was involved with the husband. Well, one time, you know, I just lived up there in that company house on that road. It's still there. The house is still there. And I'd see her walking downtown to this grocery store, you know. And I finally saw her one day, I think downtown or some, and I told her, I said, you don't have to walk to town. I said, just come to my house, because I go downtown every morning or every day to get groceries and get my mail and stuff. And there's no sense in you walking down there. And then the Clark kids, one of them would take her home. She'd go to Quality Cash Market and get her groceries, and then one of the boys would take her home in the truck. You know, so she had a ride home, didn't have to walk back up the hill, And I
Right.
told her, I said, there's no sense in you walking to town. Just come to my house and you can ride down with me because I go every day. My kids, Danny was just a baby and I wrapped in a blanket on the back seat or on the seat there with me. And the other kids in the back seat, you know, and I said, you can go with us down there to get your mail and your groceries or whatever. You don't need to walk down there. Well, one time she did it and that was the end of that. So maybe. Well, when Gene and I first got married, we lived in, like I say, at the post office, and he was working night shift, and the noise in the building, he said, we got to get out of here. I can't take this noise anymore. So we looked around and we bought a house down in Victor on the corner of 4th Street and Diamond. And we lived there for, well, all the kids were born there when we lived there. And then we moved, I worked in the assessor's office, and I knew a lot about the assessed values and taxes and how that's all determined and what you pay and all that stuff. And I thought, you know, I was born in Victor, and I've lived in Victor, but I couldn't afford to build a house in Victor because we looked at several houses. One house we looked at belonged to Ort and Maxine Yeager. We could have bought it for $3,000 completely furnished, and my husband didn't like where it was, so he wouldn't buy it. So we decided to build a house up in Goldfield because the taxes were cheaper up here. So I got busy and started looking for property, and I found these 10 lots here. And I contacted the people and bought them, and of course, working in the assessor's office, I knew people that built houses, because Cleo Delaney and I went down to see a house in Westwood Lakes that they had built. I wanted to see one that they had built, similar to this one. And so we went down there and saw it. So we decided to build up here then instead of buying a house in Victor. And of course, Gene was a veteran. You know, he was veteran stuff he could get. So that's why we built up here. And I owned the 10 lots. Well, then these people down here, then they started saying, there's no sewer in Goldfield. We get our water from the city of Victor, and it's good that we do because Goldfield has no water supply of any kind for a town. We have to get our water from Victor. And Victor has to give us water because they put their water line through Goldfield. And in order to let them do that, they say, okay, we want water from you. So that's why we buy water from Victor, because their water line runs right down here to take care of Victor. So thank God we got water. We don't have to worry about, there's no wells or anything. With the mine, you don't have any wells, you know, everything's dry. I did live in Manitou for a while with my mother, you know, and then she married my second stepfather, and she moved to Nebraska. And so I had lived there on Ruxton Avenue. It's where we lived in Capitol Hill, there in Manitou. And so I spent the summers up here with my Aunt Etta.